What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the Tight Lines Podcast. In this week's episode, summer is upon us, and we discuss 5 tips for my favorite style of fishing, wet wading. We also talk about the fun of gear shopping in different parts of the country, why you should always carry a rod with you, and we open up the tackle box once again to answer your fishing questions. So, before we discuss what my 5 tips for wet wading, we must first discuss what wet wading is. So, wet wading is very normal to normal wade fishing, which is very common for like fly fishermen, ultralight fishermen, but without the use of any sort of dry suit or waders, causing you to get wet while wading, hence the term wet wading. So it's, it seems like a pretty simple idea. I just wanted to make sure everyone's on the same page when we talk about this. You're getting in the water, you're going walking, you're not in any special clothes, you're going to get wet. It's part of it. So why do I enjoy wet wading? Well, for me, it's fun because especially during these hot summer days, it allows you to go have the fun of fishing while not getting overheated, not, just absolutely frying yourself out on the water. Typically this is going to occur in like a shallower, smaller body of water, such as a creek or a creek or a small river or a stream, just any sort of small moving water system. Typically, these are going to obviously move on and connect to larger bodies of water and other water systems, etc., and move on, which means you can find all sorts of fun species. Multi-species fishing is what I'm all about. I don't just target one. And even, here in central Indiana, some of these small fisheries can have, largemouth, smallmouth, rock bass, catfish, carp, bluegill, crappie, gar, bowfin. All sorts of fun stuff. Trout even. Some of these systems have trout. Not around here, but more up north, they can have some trout. So you're going to get all sorts of fish. You never know what you're going to quite catch. So that is the fun of wet wading. So at this point, hopefully I've convinced you guys to give wet wading a shot. And if I have, here are the 5 tips that I have to make you have a more successful and fun wet wading trip. All right, you guys. So tip number 1 of my 5 tips for wet wading is going to be downsizing your presentation. So why would you downsize your presentation? So think about the body of water we're throwing and the species we are targeting. So while yes, it is true you can find large fish in small water systems, the average fish in some of the smaller rivers and then into these creeks and streams are going to be smaller fish. So if you're going out there and throwing a half-ounce spinner bait, you're throwing lures that are going to be the same size as these fish, and so these fish aren't going to bite. You want to throw something that's going to act natural in the water. It's going to look natural for the water system, what looks like the local bait, whether it's bait fish, whether it's a crawl, whether it's bugs, whether it's a snake or a lizard or whatever these fish are eating. You want to mimic the local forage rather than, just throwing something stupid in the water like I said, a ginormous spinnerbait or a chatterbait, because you're just not seeing those through there. Also, these So for me, I'm always throwing lighter gear when I'm wet wading. I don't want to carry real heavy stuff. I'm only carrying one rod with me. I'm carrying a very small amount of tackle. And when I say literally one, smaller than a 3,700 size tray, I'm taking very few lures with me, one rod, and that is it. And these smaller fish don't normally hit very hard, and I'm not throwing big lures, so I'm typically taking an ultralight setup. And so to throw these smaller, on ultralight, you don't want to be throwing, like I said, half-ounce lures. So you're throwing very light, tiny Ned rigs and worms and craws. And for me, I throw a lot of rooster tails or inline spinners. So, you want to downsize your presentation so it matches the combo you're bringing. It matches, having to carry all your stuff with you. And also matches the forage in that area. All right, you guys, tip number 2 of my 5 tips for wet wading is going to be always work up and against the current instead of down and with the current. And this has to do with walking. So how do I do this when I wet wade? And I'll explain how I do it and then why I do it. So what I do is I find my exit point. Where do I want to come out of the water at? And that's where I'll park my car. So obviously I'm going to find some sort of parking lot, a park wherever I can. My car is going to be safe. It's not going to get towed. It's not going to be in a bad spot. And that's where I'll park. And then I will get out, take my stuff, and I will walk downriver, downstream, down creek, whatever, down the water system, with the current, but on dry land. I will find how far I want to go. I will walk myself in, and then I walk myself back up the water system all the way back up to my car. So there's a couple reasons why I do this. There's actually three. First reason is a safety purpose. Working upstream takes a lot of effort, and working against the water is going to make you tired. And when you get done doing this, you don't want to have a mile walk back to your car still, where you're wet, you're covered in dirt, you're sandy, whatever you are, because you're going to chafe, you're going to be exhausted, you're going to want water, you're going to want food, whatever it may be. So just when you get out of the water, you want to be at your car and done. Rule number 2 comes to why we're going upstream, or why we're working up against the current. So if you guys ever walked in a river, when you walk, you stir up a lot of sediment, sand, dirt, rocks, whatever. Those will get up into the current and flow downstream. And what that acts as is a huge alarm to every fish downstream, 2, 3, 4 minutes ahead of you, the pace you're working, that, hey, something's coming, and it's something that's not normally here. And so what are these fish going to do? They're going to swim off and hide, and they're going to hunker down until the threat is past. And everyone knows once you spook a fish, you can't unspook them, really. It takes way too long for them to reset typically, especially in these kind of water systems. So you don't want to be spooking your fish. And the other reason, this is reason number 3 why you work against the current, also has to do with your style of fishing. And it has to do with your casting. So when you cast your lure, you want to cast it upriver and work it back down with the current, right? So think about bait fish, right? So, if you're having a hard time visualizing this, just go sit at it, go find a water system and sit and watch if you can find a clear enough one. Throw a stick in the water, watch what it does, right? So you're looking at bugs, think about the forage, okay? Think about bugs, think about lizards, think about small bait fish, think about craws. They're not always going to be swimming up against stream, right? Up against the current. They're going to be working down the current slowly over time. And these bigger fish that are targeting, bait are going to be sitting in a spot where they're very easily able to, eat, right? They want to expend as little energy as possible to eat. So you want to give yourself a more natural presentation by working with the current. So if you're throwing, let's say, a little finesse, zoom trick worm, a little 6-inch trick worm, it's going to flutter its way down to the bottom, but it's also going to flutter down stream as well, acting like a dying bait fish that's just getting swept away with the current, and a fish is likely to go eat that. So reason number 2, or tip number 2, is going to be always work against the current instead of with the current. Tip number 3 is going to be use lures with treble hooks. This is one that took me a lot of time and a lot of practice out on the water to figure out. But smaller fish tend to swipe compared to engulf when they're targeting any sort of forage. Typically what they're doing is they're going to try and strike and do startle and kind of, daze the bait and then, and then eat. They're not just going to engulf like a largemouth bass will, because you're typically working with crappie and bluegill and smallmouth and rock bass, which don't have the humongous mouths that a largemouth does. And so they have to kind of stun the bait first. And so when they take the swipe at it, a treble hook is going to be very good at hooking in for you, whereas like a single one shank hook is going to be very good for if they're engulfing. So that is going to be tip number 3. It's a very simple one, but use treble hooks. Alrighty, you guys, and now tip number 4, and that is going to be bring a dry bag for your gear. So when wet wading, obviously you're going through moving water. In these scenarios, obviously, as we talked about, in tip 2, you're going to be stirring up a lot of sand and sediment, so you're not going to quite be able to see your feet. You're going to be walking on rocks, moss, stuff that's slippery, and you really don't want to slip and fall with all of your gear. A lot of gear that I keep with me in my dry bag, or that I keep on me when I go wet wading, is going to be, obviously, I've got my rod, but I'm holding that. I'm going to have a set of pliers in my pocket, but then also carrying with me, I need to have my phone, my wallet, my keys. I'm going to need my lures. And then I've always got I wear a camera. I got a camera and then my extra batteries. And while the camera itself is waterproof, it can get wet. It's fine. It's an action camera. The extra batteries, I don't want getting wet in the battery case. So I'll destroy them. I don't want my phone, my wallet, my keys getting wet. I don't want my lures all getting soaking wet and ruining them. And so I like to keep a dry bag. I use the Marchway dry bag, Marchway. Is a dry bag that I have found off of Amazon. It's like $18 for a 10 liter, which is going to carry everything you'll ever need. It's a ton of space, and it's a really good option to keep, your $2,000 worth of stuff with you nice and dry and safe while you are out walking through the water. And then tip number 5 is going to go off of tip number 4. We were talking about slippery conditions, wet conditions, and a lot of walking. And it's going to be wear good shoes. Do not go barefoot. Do not go in flip-flops. Don't go in dude shoes. Don't go in whatever. Put on a good pair of tennis shoes or a good pair of like river shoes. You can find river shoes. Find something that is tight to your feet. Something with a good rubber sole and rubber grip on the bottom. And wear those when you walk, because you're going to be doing a ton of walking and a ton of slippery conditions. And you don't want to be slipping and falling, getting sand and rocks in your, inside your shoes, and just being uncomfortable all the time. You want to be out having a lot of fun. So that is our top 5, or my top 5 tips for you guys for wet wading. To recap, number 1 was downsize your presentation. Number 2 was always work against the current instead of with the current. Number 3 was use lures with treble hooks. Number 4 was bring a dry bag for your gear. And number 5 is to wear a good pair of shoes. So our 5 tips are done. We're going to move on to our next topic, which is going to be the fun of gear shopping in different parts of the country. So I recently just got back from a trip to Iowa for work, which was a ton of fun. And while doing that, I got to stop at a couple different Bass Pro shops, which was fun. I got to go to a couple different. I also went to a Walmart and walked around there when I had a little bit of free time, but I didn't have much on this work trip. But it was a ton of fun to get to shop for tackle, even 3 hours from my house from here. But at one point I was about 7.5 or 8 hours away when I was up in Iowa, and it's a ton of fun because for a couple reasons. First one is getting to see new gear that is popular in that area. I was up there and I was finding, all sorts of musky stuff and all sorts of pike stuff, which you don't really see down in this area. There's, there was walleye stuff. We don't fish walleye, pike, and muskie down in central Indiana. Northern Indiana, sure, a little bit, but not as much as Iowa. Iowa is much more known for that. So it's cool to see that stuff, but also targeting species that you already target here, like largemouth bass. They may fish in a different manner. You may find a lure that you've never seen before, or you may find a lure that you've seen before, but it's in a different color because it matches up there. And you may pick some of those up and bring it back, and this is something that this fish has never seen before. And all of a sudden, you're still throwing a 110 size jerkbait, but you found a new color that's popular for up in Iowa, and you bring it back to Indiana, and it's a color that they've never seen here before, and they go ballistic for it, and they just obliterate it. Another reason, finding new brands that may sell, a similar item that, you like to use. So let's say you like, when I go wet wading, as we were just talking about, I love a rooster tail. I always just buy the Rooster Tail brand or whatever the Walmart brand is, but this time I found a brand called Blue Fox that was popular out of New York, but they sell a lot in Iowa too that I'd never heard of before. So going to go, try those out. There was another one that I found that was, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was some really cool, like, oversized inline spinner. But instead of a treble hook, it had a single EWG on the end with a trailer, so it's supposed to look like schooling fish, almost like an inline, almost like a spinner bait. It's also fun to find small local brands in the area that you can try them out. You don't have to pay shipping the first time because you buy it in store, and then if you like it, then you can buy it off their website direct from the supplier, and sure, you pay shipping for that, but then you can try them out too. Also, it's fun, I think, to bring back a little memento from each trip. I like to find something just to, even if I use it or not, just something to be like, hey, I got this in, Orange Beach, Alabama, or Los Angeles, or wherever you went. So if you're out and about, if you're on vacation, you're able to, obviously, go check out your local fishing store, see what kind of, look for brands that you've never seen before, look for styles of lures you've never seen before, look for, whatever, look for stuff that's different than what you see in your area, and pick one up and try it. Worst comes to worst, it doesn't work, and you've got a cool something to put up on your wall that says, hey, I got this in wherever. Our second to last topic today is going to be why you should always bring a rod with you everywhere you go. And this goes back to my trip to Iowa. So I was out working on a golf course, and I had some downtime, and I was out driving around some ponds. And man, did I wish I had a rod with me, because there were a ton of little tiny, probably foot and a half long carp sitting in this pond on this course. And while I didn't have enough downtime to fish, it was one of those where maybe after I got done for the evening, I could have walked down to this pond and gone carp fishing for a bit. Or I could have gone to fish for some bluegill that I saw up on the pond on hole 3. we were on private property. I didn't need to have a license for it, and it would have been a ton of fun to go fish up there and make some new memories. So it made me kind of think, man, if only I had even my 5.6 ultralight with 4 pound mono on it, right, 6 pound mono on it, and just a cup, a small box. I mean, that doesn't take up any space in your car, but with a pair of pliers and you're good to go. So I think from now on, wherever I go, I'm just going to kind of keep a small rod and reel with me, and hopefully there's time to catch something. So with that, guys, we're going to go ahead and open up this week's tackle box. Please be sure to submit your questions to the tackle box in the comments below. You can also comment on, you can also send me a DM on my Instagram. It is Tyler Plackey Fishing. Tyler Plackefishing, Tyler Plackey Fishing, and the profile picture is going to be a picture of my logo, which is the TPF logo with a hook in it, and then 4 of me holding fish. You're gonna obviously see pictures of me holding fish and doing stuff on that page. So go ahead and follow me on there. Go ahead and drop follow, and also be sure to submit your questions there. But this week we have 2 questions from the tackle box. Question number 1 is going to be, what is the best bait for catching largemouth bass in the summer? So when I think summer, I'm thinking winter style of fishing. So in the winter fishing, you are throwing slow, you're throwing deep, you're getting these fish sitting out at the bottom, right? I have noticed that when it gets real hot in the summer, these fish like to dig down deep and go hide. And that's very similar to what they do in winter. They dig deep, they hide, they stay down now in what's cool water compared to hot water. Warm water in the winter, cool water in the summer, where they're not getting beat on by the sun, and then they're also not exposed to predators. But also, what's different from winter is instead of looking for a small meal, they're looking for a big meal, right? So these fish want to expend as little energy as possible to get as big of a meal as possible. So what can you guys think of? And this will take 10 seconds to let you guys think. But I want you to think of a bait that's going to be slow moving, that can be worked extremely slow, but it's also very large. 10 seconds. Let's think. All right, so there's your 10 seconds to think, and here's the one that I came up with. I love a very large worm. And I'm talking like 8 inches or larger. I'm talking probably even 10-inch worms. I found some 10.5-inch yum worms, almost like a really big, not a stick bait, but a worm, almost like a large trick worm. And these can have a thick diameter, right? But you can throw a jig head on these to really get into the bottom a little bit quicker. You can weightless Texas rig them. There's all sorts of ways. I wouldn't wacky rig these. They're just too funny to wacky rig. But, you can jig head them. You can weighted Texas rig and weightless Texas rig. There's a couple different ways to do this. But what you're looking for is a large presentation that'll kind of flutter its way down to the bottom and just kind of sit at the bottom mimicking a bait fish. That these fish can see this large this large profile, a little bit thicker, but really long profile, and think, ooh, that looks like, a great dinner. And it's going to be slow. It's going to be lethargic. These fish are going to have time to look at it and say, okay, this looks like an easy meal for me. And then that's where they're going to attack. So for me, dead of summer, sun beating down overhead today. It's 98 degrees here. It's brutally hot. I got sunburned at the pool this afternoon. What am I throwing? I'm going to be throwing a large worm. And I'm talking, like I said, 8-10 inches plus. Ribbon tails are great. Wiggly worms. Also, I wouldn't be throwing a hard stick, big kind of firm stick bait, but I would find a nice large worm. And the second question today that we're going to have is going to be, what is the best rod and reel setup for finesse bass fishing? So my opinion is very traditional on this. It's very old school compared to what a lot of people like nowadays. I understand that the concept of BFS, which is Bait Finesse Systems, I believe is what it's called, Bait Cast Finesse Systems, has become humongously popular among anglers. It's huge on YouTube. It's huge everywhere in the world. I'm not a huge fan of BFS. For me personally, if I'm going to be throwing downsize, I want to throw finesse, I want to throw a spinning combo. So what I like to use, if I'm throwing anywhere from a Ned rig to a small blade bait to, a Texas rig to a craw to, a very small flipping, very, very small jig for the bottom. If I'm throwing something small and finessey where I'm kind of, I'm throwing slow and feeling for bites rather than swimming it through the water, I'm throwing a spinning combo. And specifically, I'm going to use a 7-foot medium fast, medium weight, strength, and then fast action spinning combo with 10-pound braid. And why braid? That was kind of a question last week. I like 10-pound braid, specifically braid for this, because it lets me, you need to be setting a hook up through a fish, right? The fish is not setting the hook on itself. You're setting the hook, and while you have light gear, you need to be able to, you need to pierce that hook up through the fish's mouth, right? So you need braid that's going to be able to get that hook through the mouth and then fight the fish afterwards. You can fish ultralight if you're going extra small, but, a 7-foot medium fast spinning combo with a 10-pound braid on it. And if you're worried about line shyness, tie a fluoro leader. There's a billion knots on them. Go learn a braid to fluoro leader. I don't use them very often because I don't have that issue. I just tie straight braid onto my hooks or onto my lures, and I never have an issue. But a 7-foot medium fast spinning combo should cover pretty much any sized quote unquote finesse bait. Unless you're throwing like ultra micro, 1/32 ounce, in which case you're obviously going to go ultra light. And yeah, if I'm in that situation, I'm doing that light. You can throw BFS, sure, if you're just in love with bait casters. But I think there's something fun about throwing a spinning reel there anyways. So that was it for the tackle box, and that is going to pretty much conclude this week's episode, guys. I want to thank you all so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. We are hopefully going to continue to grow as we have so far. All of you guys really mean a ton to me. Please be sure to, as always, follow the podcast, leave us a 5-star rating, comment down below any questions you have for the tackle box, any future topics you'd like to hear. Remember, new episodes are going to come out every Wednesday morning at, I believe it's 4 a.m. is when I have it set. Should be 4 a.m. on Wednesday mornings on Apple Music and Spotify, or on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We're working on iHeartRadio, working on Amazon, working on a couple other platforms. So tell your friends, and hopefully we will see you guys next week. So thank you all for listening. And until next time, guys, tight lines.